Okay guys, as you can see, I've got my throat erosion gauge in my K31 Frankenstein. This is a receiver, new old stock K31 receiver, a SIG barrel that I picked up that is excellent condition. If you can read the numbers on that throat erosion gauge, you'll see that it's basically 2. It reads a 2, maybe slightly less than 2, which is near new or nearly near new, almost no throat erosion on it. A brand new barrel I found will go about 1 point, little under 1 point, or I mean a little over 1.5. And this one, so this throat on this barrel is got virtually almost no wear. Each whole number represents 1/1000th of an inch of throat erosion as far as dimension goes, size wise. And this is a for your information, this is a Badger Ordnance M1 Grand throat erosion gauge. It works wonderfully in a K31. You just have to recognize the fact that you have a zero reference point different than it would be in an M1 Grand, but they're still very close. The reference point, your baseline on a K31, like I say, in a brand new barrel would be, oh, let's say 1.5, maybe a little bit more. And from there you can use that to judge how much throat erosion there is on that barrel. Like for instance, if I were to get a barrel that were to check 3.0 on it, that means that barrel probably has 1/1000th of an inch throat erosion, not very much. And if you get out to say the 6 or 7 range, you could look down that thing and see that the throat on that barrel would basically be gone. And I have seen that. So anyways, I just thought you'd find that interesting to get this video started off with. As you can see here, we've got 2 rounds, 7.5 by 5.5. One is, of course, a hand-loaded ammunition, hand-loaded bullet using a standard commercial 308 diameter Hornady 178 grain, what they call a ELD bullet, extremely low drag. Next to a piece of GP-11 ammunition with its projectile. And I put them next to each other like that so you can get an idea of how the bullets are situated in the case. You may want to make note of how much further in the commercial bullet appears to be as opposed to the GP-11. And there is a reason for that, and that's what I'm going to go into right now and explain to you, which I find quite fascinating, very interesting, at least to me, and it kind of just blows me away, the genius in which the Swiss designed their GP-11 ammunition. Now what we got here is this is my Hornady tool that I use for checking bullet freeplay in any given rifle, and of course they come with. You have to have a special case that's threaded on the back so it'll screw on to the Hornady tool. In this case I had to make the case for the 7.5 by 5.5 because Hornady does not make it commercially, so I made one myself. And there's another video on YouTube, if you look, that'll show you how to do that. But at any rate, you're going to need that tool, and I'm going to use that tool today to demonstrate some differences here that I would think that most people probably don't consider, but has come to light to me recently. Okay, here's some illustration of something that I think is going to you're going to find real interesting and relate to some differences in how each of these bullets interface with the barrel of the rifle. First, you're going to notice on the left we have the standard Hornady 178 grain ELD match, extremely low drag, and I've marked off the section of it that is actually 308.308 inch in diameter, and then I've marked off the section of the GP-11 projectile that comes in two different dimensions. Just give that some thought. Think about that a little bit. The exposed part of the bullet is 302 thousandths of an inch, 0.302 inch, and the part of the bullet that is down pressed into the case is 0.306 inch, 306 inch. And also I want you to make note of, look at the shape of the nose of it. You see how much more of a longer taper the GP-11 bullet has as opposed to the supposedly extreme low drag Hornady bullet. The difference is actually quite noticeable and quite different for the two of them. So let's take a look and see how these two bullets will interface and some of the differences that need to be considered when you're utilizing one or the other. Okay, here's the setup with the Hornady tool. As you can see, I've got the my case screwed on, my test case screwed onto the Hornady tool. I have the bullet inserted into the case, and I push the bullet down so that it's well below where it's going to meet the lands in the rifle. And the process here is that you take this setup, you put it into the chamber, you push it into the chamber, you loosen the lock screw on the back of the Hornady tool, and then you push the bullet up into the chamber until it meets the lands. You retighten your lock screw, pull it all out, and then you can measure your base to the O-give on the bullet itself, and that'll tell you what your minimum, or maximum, I should say, maximum seating depth of that bullet can be, so that it does not interfere with the lands of the barrel when the round is chambered. Okay, now here's the setup. I've got the Hornady tool inserted into the chamber of my receivered barrel. And just a little bit of information for comparative reasons. I have found that especially on American military .30 caliber rifles, whether they be 1903s, M1 Grands, M14s, or M1As, that the bullet has roughly, at a minimum, a free play, meaning the amount of distance the bullet has to travel before it contacts the lands when the round is fired. They have at minimum 100 thousandths free play. Most of the time I find them to be in the 125 thousandths range of free play for the bullet. And given that information, I know that when you reload commercial projectiles for a K31, the perception is that the throats are very, very tight, very close. And now keep in mind too, this is somewhat important. As a barrel wears and you get more and more throat erosion, the amount of free play will increase. The amount of distance that the bullet travels before it contacts the lands will increase as the barrel becomes eroded at the throat. So K31s have notoriously close, tight throats for people reloading commercial .308 bullets. And of course, my curiosity got the better of me, which is basically spawned this video. In light of the fact of how I understand how GP-11 projectiles are made, with the bullet being of two different dimensions, a exposed part being 302 thousandths, and the pressed into the case part of the bullet being 306 thousandths, as opposed to a single dimensional bearing surface on a commercial piece of on a commercial bullet being 308. It gave thought to how does that affect the free play of a piece of GP-11 ammunition in the chamber of a K-31. And so that's why I'm making this comparison. So here's what I'm going to do. I've already put the bullet in the case. I'm going to push it. I'm going to push it all tight up into the throat. Tighten my lock nut down, and we pull the bullet back out. See, so now that's the bullet as how far it would have to travel before it reaches the lands of the barrel. Let's measure it. And here you have you're going to need a caliper, and the other part of the Hornady tooling you're going to need is the adapter to put onto the caliper, and in this case for 30 caliber you're going to need the collet that goes into it to make this measurement. Okay, and that is our reading with the Hornady 178 grain ELD bullet. You can see that bullet is very tight in that it's seated well into the case. You can see we have a reading of 3-inch 274 thousandths, and of course you have to remove an inch for the adapter, the Hornady adapter on the caliper. So actually the distance from the base to the ogive of the bullet is 2-inch 274, and that is the distance that bullet will have to travel where everything comes up tight, where the base of the bullet is flush against the face of the bolt and the ogive starts to contact the rifling, the lands in the barrel. So now let's check a piece of GP-11. Let's check a GP-11 bullet. And of course here's the tool with the GP-11 projectile in it. I'm going to put it into the chamber and make the measurement. Loosen the lock nut on it, push it in, and let's check it. Well, now take a look at that reading. That's with a piece of GP-11, and you can kind of see on the bullet itself where the crimp is and how far it travels before it reaches the lands. That reading is 3-inch 442, and of course you got to subtract the inch for the tool, so it's 2-inch 442. Now what we'll need to reference it to is a piece of GP-11, the complete GP-11 round, and measure it so we can get an idea how far that bullet travels before it reaches the rifling in the barrel. Here's a piece of GP-11 ammunition, unmolested, and you can see the reading on it. It reads 3-inch 323, or 2-inch 323 minus the collet, the Hornady tool. So if you do your math on that, you're looking at the fact that the GP-11 projectile has to travel about 120,000 still before it makes contact with the rifling in the barrel. So in spite of what people come to discover when reloading standard .308 commercial bullets with a very short throat, you can see that by utilizing the GP-11 projectile, that the Swiss have made it so that it still has to travel a very conventional 125 thousandths or so before it contacts the rifling in the barrel. Now let's take that in comparison to a piece of commercially loaded or hand-loaded ammunition with the same referencing the same measurements. Now here's a piece of hand-loaded ammunition with a Hornady 178 grain ELD bullet in it, and look at the reading on that. That is 3-inch almost 260, 259, And if you were to notice, that bullet is seated just about as far down into that case as you can get it. Remember, the reading for the freeplay using the Hornady bullet was 2-inch 274, 275, meaning that even though this bullet is seated as far down into that case as it is, it really has only about 15 1/1000ths of an inch free play before that bullet contacts the rifling in the barrel. Okay, so in conclusion, you're looking at these two rounds here. Although they are made for the same cartridge, they are so radically different from each other that they're almost completely different rounds. You can see how far into the case that commercial bullet has to be seated before it won't interfere with the lands in the rifle when you chamber the round, as compared to the GP-11. The bullet on the right, the GP-11, I can't help but think, though, because of the design of it in 2 dimensions, before the crimping and after, that was made in such a way that it still has all the free play necessary for conventional military rounds, probably for purposes of pressure, spiking pressure. And not only that, but think about this as a fact too, is that as that GP-11 projectile starts to enter the rifling, at first at 302 thousandths diameter, that bullet travels quite a bit of distance into the lands with very minimal interference fit between the bullet bearing surface and the rifling in the land. So it actually is getting a little bit of an easy head start. And I'm thinking that would account for a more laid back pressure curve than when a piece of commercial 308 dimension bullet is fired and it instantly hits that rifling with that 308 dimension. There has to be quite a bit of difference in resistance between those two bullets initially starting into the bore of the rifle. And in my mind, to me, that looks like a pressure spike on the 308 dimension bullet, as opposed to a more gentle pressure curve rising to the point where the bullet gets to the 306 part and makes its full bearing contact. I can't help but think also that no matter how much they think that a 308 diameter bullet is an extremely low drag, I would be willing to bet that specially made, very ingeniously designed GP-11 projectile, you got to remember, these things were designed in 1911. Over 100 years ago, they had this stuff figured out. Those Swiss cats, they are smart people, and they're very detail oriented. They like every last detail. And I can't help but think, no matter how you cut it or slice it, that piece of GP-11 ammunition with its projectile has to have a very high ballistic coefficient, and not to mention probably a little bit of an increased sectional density, because it still weighs basically the same, but it's being compacted into a smaller surface area. So just some thoughts, some different things that randomly came to mind when I discovered what I discovered about the GP-11 projectile and how uniquely made, ingeniously and uniquely made they actually are. So you guys that are doing hand loading on for K31s, you might want to take a little of this into account. Your free play on the bullet in any commercially loaded 308 bullet is going to be minimal at best. You cannot push that 308 bullet really any further into the case because of the nature of the design of it just being one dimension, and that being 308. So Anyways, I just thought that would be something interesting for some of you guys to see. And I know I did. I came to a new understanding of some things why GP-11 ammunition is so incredibly deadly accurate and consistent. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching.